Welcome. This talk is sponsored by the Yale Center for Environmental Communication at the Yale School of the Environment. Based at Yale University School of the Environment, the Center for Environmental Communication, or YCEC for short, we focus on 4 areas. We conduct research on the psychological, cultural, and political factors that influence environmental attitudes and behavior. We teach students and train working professionals. We convene a global network of climate communication scholars and practitioners, and we inform and engage the public through environmental journalism, including Yale Climate Connections, our climate-focused news service that engages many thousands of people every day and includes a short daily radio story that airs on nearly 800 stations nationwide. Now let's get into today's topic, Indigenous Voices on Climate. We at the Yale Program on Climate Change Communication, along with our colleagues at the George Mason Center for Climate Change Communication, we conduct 2 nationally representative surveys each year in the US as part of our Climate Change in the American Mind project. Indigenous communities are a relatively small proportion of the US population, so our individual nationally representative surveys, they don't sample enough Indigenous respondents to provide results about how these diverse communities in the US perceive climate change causes, risks, impacts, and solutions. However, the Yale climate opinion maps do make it possible to see public responses to climate change all the way down to the county level. And when we zoom in, we find that the areas with the highest proportions of Indigenous peoples are often the most worried about climate change and supportive of climate change action. For deeper insights, we turn to our friends and colleagues in today's conversation. If you are a community or organization looking for support in your climate communications, please reach out to our partnerships team at ypccc.partners@yale.edu. Don't worry if you didn't catch that email because that email address, because it will come in the follow-up email after the webinar. We acknowledge that the Yale School of the Environment is on the traditional lands of the Mohegan, Mashantucket Pequot, Eastern Pequot, Skakekok, Golden Hill, Paugussett, Niantic, and Quinnipiac peoples who have stewarded these lands and waterways for generations. We honor and respect the enduring relationship that exists between these nations and this land. As for the logistics for the webinar, the chat is closed. Please use the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen to ask the speakers questions and vote for your favorite questions asked by others. Also, thank you for all the questions you sent in as you registered for the webinar. We will make a recording of this conversation available on our website and send a link to everyone who registered in the follow-up email. Today's talk will be moderated by our friend, Dr. Lagipoiva Cherelle Jackson, who you may remember from February's webinar on storytelling. Dr. Jackson is a Pacific Islands journalist and scholar whose 2 decades of reporting have centered on climate, gender, culture, and human rights. A reporter for The Guardian, she is also the founder of the New Atoll and co-chair of Covering Climate Now. She advances research on how journalism and AI can uphold Indigenous knowledge and narrative sovereignty in the digital age. Dr. Jackson.
Thank you, Eric, and talofa lava to everyone. It's such a pleasure to be here again with our group here at Yale Program on Climate Communication. It's an honor for me to moderate this panel, and I'll also be sharing my perspective as an Indigenous climate journalist from the Pacific Islands. It is my pleasure today to introduce our panelists for today. Our first speaker is Dr. Ihirangi Heke. Dr. Heke is a Māori scholar and environmental guide with a PhD in population health, who integrates traditional Māori environmental knowledge with systems science to promote Indigenous health and wellness. Now part of Google X's climate change initiative, his work also explores using VR and environmental science to transform elite athletes into environmentally centered leaders. Talofa lava, Ihi.
Kia ora, e pepea.
Aloha. Welcome. Our second panelist is Rahiem Eleazer. Rahiem is an environmental liaison for the Mashantucket Pequot Tribal Nation and leads environmental coordination efforts that center tribal sovereignty through partnerships with environmental and governmental organizations. His work focuses on ecological conservation, climate resilience, and integrating Indigenous philosophy into environmental practice, while he also serves on numerous local and regional environmental and cultural boards. Talofa. Rahiem.
So much. Thank you.
I'd now like to welcome, the way that we're formatting our conversation today will definitely be in conversation style. For those of you who are familiar with Oceania, ways of being and ways of knowing, we center our knowledge sharing on the Talanoa methodology, which is a learning framework that is relational and conversational so that we place our sense of self and community within the conversation. So I'd now like to welcome Dr. Ihi for his opening remarks to reflect on the topic of the day, especially on how he perceives Indigenous knowledge within the frameworks of the ever-evolving digital age that we are in.
Kia ora mai anō, mo tēnā mai te whakawātea o tātou hui tata nei rangi, ka mihi hoki ki ngā kai whakahaere o tēne. Thank you very much for the opening, Eric, rangi, for clearing a pathway for us to be able to come and talk today. There's two reasons that at the forefront of my mind why I agreed to come and do this. One of them was that the first Māori graduate from a university in Aotearoa, New Zealand, was Te Rangihiro. He did a number of interesting pieces of work, but one of them was to be associated with the Bishop Museum in Hawaii for 30 years while he was there. And to take on that post, he was provided with an honorary PhD from Yale University. So when Yale came knocking, I thought those are footsteps I'd like to step into behind and continue the connection to our people here in Aotearoa with Yale. The second reason is that my last name is Heke. One of the first signatories of the Treaty of Waitangi with British in New Zealand was the treaty that my ancestor directly signed first, which was Hone Heke. Not long after that, things weren't progressing the way they should, so he cut down the English flagpole 4 times and said, "You're not welcome here anymore." The outcome from that was that my people have said anyone that comes off that line is destined to be a disruptive thinker. So I'm here to represent the interests of disruptive ways of understanding that there's multiple ways of knowing. I don't know how long you want me to talk at this point. What did we agree on, Rangi? 5 minutes?
We agreed on you can stop when the boat stops. But we'll stop there and I'll have Rahiem introduce and then we'll come back to. I'm really honored that you're sharing that story, and I feel like we all did not realize the gravity of inviting you to be a part of this talk, and I am grateful on behalf of the organizers for you being here to share in the wisdom and to disrupt as you so perfectly and eloquently do every time. So Rahiem, in the presence of pacificness around you, welcome to the conversation.
Tāwha tō much, wiki sak na tasui sa wasus, na tai Mashantucket, katapa tō much, katapa tō maku. Good afternoon or good evening. My name is Bear in my native language, but my English name is Rahiem. I'm from Mashantucket, and I just want to say thank you also for sharing that story, because it was definitely impactful for me. We have, I'm not sure if many of you know that there are a lot of Pequots all around the world, and we even have some from New Zealand that have settled in New Zealand from whaling. So I definitely appreciate it and respect it. So but yeah, so as far as why I'm here today is mostly just to one kind of push the narrative, like Dr. Heke said, that there are other ways of knowing that Indigenous people are still here. And realistically, in my humble opinion, I think that we should be at the forefront of these conversations, having generational knowledge that has been passed down for millennia on these locations and having been kind of ignored largely for so long. I think it's time that we step up and kind of take this responsibility on and share at least portions of our knowledge to help guide those that could use it. And I will I will say that I definitely appreciate this opportunity.
So much for sharing, and it's great to have you here as well, so that we can compare the rich Indigenous knowledge histories that our communities share. So I'll start with this question. I'll come back to you, Ihi, if I may. And this is in relation to research. Like your work is, you bridge the divide between community, practitioner knowledge, your academic expertise, and then now you're working with Google to really center some of the work that you're doing in advancing not just Indigenous knowledge, but also the wellness and the health expertise that you have. So my question here a question that came from one of our audience members is, could you please share your reflections on how to indigenize climate research with communities?
Okay. An interesting thing that comes up in this space is that for a number of Indigenous nations globally, is climate change isn't a new thing at all. We've seen it come and go a number of times, nothing to this extreme, but we've witnessed ice ages and we've adapted, moved through those and come out the other side. This one represents a greater challenge than most. The other part about this is that the greatest longitudinal study that exists in the history of humankind is Indigenous people. We've been studying the environment for millennia. We know how it moves, what it does, how it changes. And a lot of the data that's been made available to generation after generation is within a processing power that's exclusive to Indigenous through those stories. And the reluctance to share them has been primarily because the ways that our information has been engaged with in the past isn't how we intended it to be provided. So you can see why Indigenous nations aren't interested, keen, or motivated to share some of that longitudinal study with other people because of the risk that it represents. But I think we've arrived at a point where the planet could go down if we don't provide these things. If we don't contribute, then there's a chance that if we'd held that back and the planet doesn't survive, what was the point? I think probably the difficulty at this stage is the codex that's required to understand that the vocalizations that humans make by moving their vocal cords back and forwards is no different than a stream burbling and communicating an idea. But if you don't have the codex to understand what a stream's trying to tell you, then it's just a stream. And until you have Indigenous knowledge present, it will continue to be that. But if you have a large rock in the middle of the stream, then it's telling you that there's some power at the top that had pushed it there. So don't stand in the middle of the stream in case that power comes through and wipes you out. Or if it has more algae on one side of the rock than the other, then it can tell you the strength and how consistent that strength is. Or the size of the rock will generate a different sound through the water's relationship with that rock. And so then you could look at the relationship of the two to what they cause. And without that codex or that understanding, people just pass that by. But there's another form of knowledge that comes out of the environment that Indigenous people will become really close to, and we're the interpreters of that. And that ability isn't so much about how we can process and hand on direct content, but more about the tool that's required to do it. And I think because there's so many different environments globally and opportunities to engage with them on a person by person, regardless of their Indigenous background or not, they still need the codex. They still need the processing tool to be able to do that. So the first part is about figuring what type of tool might be relevant for the district you're in. But also, and this is my last point on this one, Rangi, is for us to be able to share that information, we probably need to supersede the ideas of gender, ethnicity, race, age, and a whole range of other barriers that stop us communicating as humans, and go to a starting point of environmental knowledge around water, land, and stars first, because it removes all of those, and then we can talk.
Thank you, Ihi. I mean, that's how our people got to where we are, right? We didn't have a GPS at the time.
It's built in.
We looked to the stars. So thank you for sharing that. Rahiem, I wanted to come to you with this question of ways to catalyze other Indigenous tribes using their own traditions to address climate change, whether it's overtly acknowledged or not. This is one of the questions I wanted to put that to you.
No, I appreciate it. So I think that there are plenty of ways that we could catalyze it. I think first we have to address that we are to Dr. Ihi's point. I think he was alluding to this earlier, is we are very much a land-based people. And there's a lot that can be said to what we know as far as from specific locations, and it is very important to identify that. I apologize. Can you restate the question? I just want to make sure I
Sure.
answer completely.
So what are some of the ways to catalyze Indigenous tribes using their own traditions to address climate change?
So I would say if we can focus on each specific place, I think that'll go a long way. I think that there's a lot of knowledge that's held within each community that can help with that.
Thank you, Rahiem. Did you want to expand or?
I apologize. I got thrown off here.
I'll center an answer in terms of how we do it in Samoa, at least, with village-based knowledge and tradition. When we communicate to village leaders or elders, to make them understand climate change a bit more, we center the practices that they have in the village. So how international organizations communicate climate to villages in Samoa is through, how has fisheries changed? How has fishing practices change in the village? And then you also have the crops. How has droughts affected crops? Because it's only when villages see the impact of climate on their communities can they then get involved and come up with solutions to then address their own needs. So that's at least how we catalyze it in Samoa.
No, I appreciate that. I definitely would echo that. There's definitely so the way that at least I tried to do it for our tribe is to help so we're in the process of reestablishing a lot of our traditions due to colonization and everything. We've gotten stripped of a lot of the traditional knowledge. So we are able to bring it back in the form of language, in the form of, just to Dr. Ihi's point earlier, just getting back and creating that right relation with nature, and then also leaning on our sister tribes to help address some of the gaps that we've witnessed. And so the way that I like to do it is to help reintroduce what I've learned to the community, and then through those traditional teachings of, whether it be our cultural ways of harvesting, or our other advocacy work in that realm, it will help promote, from an ecological standpoint, the health of those land bases. So, for example, we're in the process of trying to do cultural burns to help promote our cedar swamp. And with Atlantic white cedar, it only really gets promoted through burns, and there's a lot of um, ecological effects that are benefited from the cultural burns that it hasn't seen for generations, just due to the current laws and regulations in at hand. So there's a lot of benefits that come from that regard.
Thank you, Rahiem. I want to come back to you, Ihi, on the religious and philosophical beliefs associated with nature. You know, this is about Indigenous voices in climate, and I want to let's center that. So I wanted to ask, so someone else brought forward this question of Indigenous communities appear to have religious philosophical beliefs on nature that non-Indigenous communities do not have. How do we reconnect?
Well, some years ago, I wrote a white paper to myself, I guess you'd call it, looking at the differences between animism, totemism, shamanism, and paganism, and then looked at the fact that Māori and a number of Pacific Island groups tend to be all of them, plus a combination of our own views that are obtained from the land that we're engaging with. I'm not sure that they drop into the definitive way of describing religion necessarily, although they're a version of determining one's life based on what the cycles of nature are, and that we have different ways of interpreting those through dominant features that develop as part of our cultural understanding. When I travel through other First Nations groups, I see glimpses of all of them. So the fact that our man here, Rahiem, was talking about earlier, that his tribal name is Bear, I can see that. I can see the way he conducts himself and talks reflects those things, because of the connection to that as an animal that he understands and his people have believed that he's become. While others carry that representation of that particular thing with them to remind them of their roles. And that for each group, whether you choose to call it religious or not, there's a space that exists in the creation space that might be referred to as religious, but after the separation of those creation myths and into the start of where we are as people, and I use myths in a really broad term here, it's just a word that pisses me off actually when people say myths. I said, I'll give you myths right between the eyes if you like, is the idea that in that creation space is where there's multiple ways of determining that. And they can be Christian, they can be Māori, they can be First Nations out of the US. You can do whatever you want in that space. That's up to you. But after the separation and into the space where we start to see humans moving about, that's the area that's open to debate and ways of looking at it that have climate applications, absolutely. In the context of being Māori, in the creation space we have here was the separation of the sky from the earth. And prior to that is what we call the creation space of darkness. But once those parents were separated, light came in, we saw our world, and then we have a term for that called atua. And people think that we're talking about gods and therefore it's religious. Now, some 15 years ago, one of our government organizations said here, we'll never work with you because you're suggesting that the way to improve population health is by including atua, which means that you're talking about gods, which means that there's a religious connotation. So we can't use you. We can't discuss anything you have to say. And I said, that's because you're idiots, because you don't understand the idea that these atua are representatives of bodies of environmental science. They're our version of philosophy of why things work the way they do in the environment. So you can call it religious if you want to, but I don't think they are, as a post-separation of the sky from the earth for us. It's pure environmental science. And so we've chosen to not discuss the pre-separation space, which is in this area of how people believe they were created. But after that, absolutely. That's where we pursue all of the different ways that environments are represented, and more specifically, because they're the oldest bodies of knowledge we've got. Water's older than me. Mountains are older than me. All of those places are older than me. So why would I go to a human to ask them their advice on causing climate change? It's not going to happen in that space, but you still need the interpretive power to understand what water's telling you about better ways to improve the outcomes for humans as an incidental beneficiary of being able to interpret what environment's saying. And they're radically different things. By the way, you asked me questions, and this is a little trick, Rahiem. I never answer any of the questions anybody says. I just talk about the things I like.
Well, you're good
That's
at it.
that's why we always have. That's why whenever I'm invited to a panel, I'm like, I want Ihi on this panel so I can talk story and hear story. Ihi, you bring up this point of interpreting nature as a way to protect nature and also to sustain our belief systems and our Indigenous knowledge. What about the protection of that interpretive power that we as Indigenous peoples have? What's your stance on that? How do we protect that power?
Well, there's a couple of spaces in here. Rahiem, you better be writing up some powerful notes here and going, I'm going to smash this fellow from New Zealand. I've got better ideas. So I'll talk for a minute until the big gun comes out. Okay.
Yeah, we'll give it to him after.
There's a couple of things that have happened through being associated with Google. One of them is that half of my people are concerned. They say, oh, we don't want our data anywhere near a place that takes data and uses it inappropriately. And they've been punished for that in the past. And I think we have to have the aspirations of hope that a place like that could work with us to help us look at how AI could contribute to humanity instead of neoliberal capitalist gain. Now, if you're looking at America and China and Russia potentially, that's the main driving interest of how AI is developing, is what can we gain from it instead of what can it contribute to humanity. And in order to develop that process, you're going to need a data set from Indigenous groups that they feel is protected. And so that requires data centers that have data sovereignty that's ensured by those that provide the information, not by outside sources that can access it when they freely choose, which means that any of the solutions that are generated not only come from that data center, but if that data center is biased towards information that's been obtained only from Indigenous sources, then the solutions will be as well. And if those pockets of knowledge have been developed from environment as Indigenous people have identified it, and then become the mouthpiece on behalf of water, behalf of land, not for themselves, because it's anthropocentric arrogance to believe that I am better than water, or I'm better than a mountain when I'm only here for 80 or 90 years, and it's there for millions of years. So in part, it's creating spaces where the voice of land, water, stars can be reproduced by what we feed into locations that have access that can be utilized in productive ways. I know that's a lot of information to throw at you, but it's one of the areas that I think lends itself beautifully to developing and representing an alternative to what AI is being geared up to do at the moment. But it's going to need a lot of support. Over to you, Rahiem. Smash it out of the park, my bro.
Rahiem.
Following that, no,
No
so
pressure, eh?
I definitely agree with almost everything that you were just saying. Our communities are very much similar in the sense that we have been burned in the past, so we're tend to be very restrictive in what we actually talk about or discuss or choose to release into the public. I'm dealing with a lot of that myself with the work that I do. It's very much outward facing as well as inward facing. So a lot of the times I need to get the clearance from the community to say certain things or release certain special information. To your point, though, it's all based on our relationship with the land. We have that special connection just due to the generations of knowledge, passing on knowledge, and our ancestors taking it upon themselves to create that relationship with the environment. Um, I don't think that that gives me any special rights to kind of withhold it. But at the same time, I understand that there are situations, especially, I can't speak for anybody out in the Pacific Islands, but at least for where I live, where this information has been used against us or inappropriately, even. And I think it's important to kind of set the stage before we we provide any information. So like the concept of FPIC, the free, prior, and informed consent is huge so that we know exactly what we're getting into. Um, I think it's helpful if contracts are written up to provide ownership of the information, any data that has been produced, having ownership be held back into the property of the actual indigenous communities that provided that data, um, as well as I think it's important for us to share as much as we can, but in a way that they hear the full story rather than just snippets so that I don't know, I can't speak for anybody else but from my own community, but so we'll have reasons that certain things are the way they are. If you just hear like we do, I'll use the example that I used earlier. If you hear that we do cultural burns without the reasoning behind it, then all you're gonna think is that we just like burning stuff. So it's it's one of those situations that it's you need to know the entire concept, not just a snapshot to get the full effect. And in order to do that, you need to have that relationship with the indigenous community as well. So it's one of those situations where for me, the biggest help whenever I'm communicating with other organizations or institutions is to have that relationship with that entity prior to providing any information so that I feel more comfortable that it won't be misused, it won't be misappropriated or anything like that. And then as far as AI is concerned, I think when it's used effectively to Dr. E's point, it can be a very effective tool as long as we're not using it as a crutch and using it instead as a tool to help better ourselves. And this is the age that we live in. It's technology is everywhere, and we can use it in ways that will support our own cultural improvements. I know I've heard of like technology that's used to help with traditional language classes. So I've heard of there's a lot of we've been dabbling in different technologies to help with dance and singing and so many other avenues. So um I think the best way to go about it is to first have that relationship. That's key. And then after that, just trying to maintain ownership of at least the raw data. But once it gets out there, it's out there. And I'd like to think it will only better society for it.
Ihi, you unmuted, so I'm.
Oh,
Did you
no, I
want
thought
to
you'd
add?
ask me a question and I better prepare myself. That's all.
Oh, okay. I like the prefer. See how prepared we are, Rahiem. I wanted to reflect on what you have both addressed here on the role of AI in climate and Indigenous knowledge. I've reported on climate and in frontline communities in the Pacific Islands for over 20 years. One of the issues that has come up in relation to AI and climate is that when Indigenous leaders are sharing climate knowledge and Indigenous climate solutions, some of these, and then we write stories, right? We write amazing journalism pieces that talk about Indigenous climate solutions and Indigenous knowledge at the village level to address climate change. These news articles then go out into the world and are then open for AI to be utilized. And this is without the permission of the Indigenous leader who spoke to me in Samoa and who spoke to my colleague in Tuvalu and who spoke in Indigenous languages in perhaps just the hope that they will talk about this, but not offering that very sacred knowledge to the world to use. So we're entering into that ethical dilemma where we have this intersection of, say, journalism, my area, my field of climate journalism, and in very sacred Indigenous knowledge. So I wanted to bring this back to you both on, where's the fine line when it comes to that knowledge of our communities as it relates to climate change, and the misuse internationally. And then segue to that is how do we, what are examples that you can offer that utilizes effectively communicating Indigenous climate solutions or climate issues to outside communities without compromising that Indigenous knowledge? Very light question here. I'm sure you can deal with it, Ihi.
Yeah, would you like me to take care of world peace next?
Yes, please, go ahead.
So one of the things that we often discuss in our community circles here is the idea that for Māori, we walk backwards into the future. It means that we look to our ancestral information that will provide us an insight into why the things that we're engaging with now can still be interpreted by what they learned. And that the things that they've learned over the last several thousand years from the environment provide solutions for us once we get the processing power adapted to it. So not only is it a useful idea to understand that we look to the past to understand our future, but we also tend to stay centered and right where we are now. Sometimes for people, fear sits in the future of a what if. And as Māori, it's not one that we've engaged with often. We've always chosen to take risks and to push the boundaries no matter what. For New Zealand itself, or Aotearoa to be peopled, it was the last place in the whole of the Pacific to have anyone here. So there was a decision made out of Tahiti, the Cooks and so on, to send Māori here or send people here without the expectation that they'd make it. So you send the crazies, you send the ones that you can afford to lose, which was us. And nobody thought we'd pull it off. We're here. And now they've got a problem on their hands and that we're going to cause trouble, which means we're going to push it as hard as we can all the time. But in order to do that, we have to understand our past and what we've come out of in order to develop solutions for now. In Pākehā or Pālangi terms, mātaranga, or in European or white fella terms, environmental knowledge is what we call mātaranga, and it sits, but unless you engage with it, nothing happens. The next phase for us is mōhotanga, where we engage with it, and we read it, we mess around it, we swim in it, we lie on our backs out in the forest and we read the signs above us. And that gives us capacity. And globally, what I'm seeing with a lot of Indigenous nations is they're developing their capacity to be able to reapply their ways of knowing. What we do as Māori is that we have a third phase called maramatanga, which is where we have developed what's been coined as dynamic capability. That term comes out of systems dynamics. There's a fellow, Peter Hovmand, out of Cleveland and Case Western Reserve, where I've lectured with him, worked with him, and we've researched these topics quite a bit. And that space of dynamic capability is really interesting because it means that we can take things from the past and apply them into what's happening now without any understanding of where contemporary society is going to head, but that we can apply things from the past into new spaces and new ways of knowing. So, for example, the impact of social media, we couldn't have predicted that. But we do have models from our past that we can reapply into ways of knowing what the outcomes might be from those platforms. So that's a central concept that we often return to, is what is the knowledge that's there? How can we develop our capacity? And then how can we be more dynamic in the ways that we apply ancestral thinking into contemporary locations? Primarily, this is also a process of having hope, that if I had no hope, I couldn't work with Google. I have to hope and have aspirations that they will have some people within that organization, and they do, and these are the ones who I work with, that want the best for humanity. Not necessarily about just making money alone, but that some of the data collecting tools that they have, and some of the innovation they have, and some of the people that are looking forward to what environment could become, can mobilize that intellect in a way that's going to contribute. And there's going to be a lot of failures along the way. There's going to be people who will extract and use our knowledge in ways that we disagree with, but with hope and with aspirations for a better future, we have to almost release that information to allow people to engage with it in ways that we don't limit, with a hope that they will do the right thing. Whereas if I don't do that, then we cut off our ability to be innovative. And the reasons that Māori have flourished since the arrival of white fellas in our country, and there's been a few, we often refer to Captain James Cook as our first tourist. He just never left. Is that when these fellas came, nobody thought that with a few of them, they would cause so much trouble. But we had to learn how to adapt to that. And so we decided fairly early on that we needed to intermarry with them in order to make them our relatives, so they can't steal their own land from themselves, because it's all of our land then. So some of us moved towards what other Indigenous groups said they would never do. And you have to take some positions with hopes and aspirations for what the future could look like when you release people to be creative with what ways have existed in ancestral ways of knowing to create a new path forward. And some of my native mates hate it when I say this out loud, but this isn't going to be just natives. We're going to have to let white people see some of these things, provide creative input, so that we get the collective IQ and intellect of everybody contributing to a better world. So it can't be just us. We're going to be involved and heavily, and provide probably data that the rest of the world has never seen. And we've deliberately held it off, but we realize that if we don't contribute now, there may be nothing left. So it's a funny situation for us to be in, because there's half of our people that are pissy, don't want to share. There's another half that are like, well, we should have a shot and just see what happens. And I'm in that space. You know, if we're not in the room, things get done to you, not with you. So we have to be present in the Googles and the Microsofts of the world, so that our voice is heard, and that it's not just a steamrolling effect of, you natives are going to get what you get. Hell no. We'll tell you what we want to do, and then we'll make some decisions and be part of the process. This began a long time ago with the first arrival of Europeans here, and it hasn't stopped. Indigenous people are the best adapters in the world. We've adapted to all sorts of crap. and we're still here. And that's going to continue on whether white people like it or not. But we're at a point where we're considering sharing. So don't be assholes about it, and we might do it.
On that note, I think while you're talking, he makes me think of that quote is, if not without us, then is it for us by us? So I think and it's also reminiscent of all of the scholarly articles and the history of our people that were written by missionaries. And so the narrative was always controlled by them when they landed on our island. So thank you for sharing that. Rahiem, I'm going to ask you a question that's been upvoted a lot here in our discussions. Do you think there is a role for museums or similar organizations to play in boosting the signal on conversations like these, as places where both human stories and science stories can be told and told together?
As the being from the tribe with the largest Native American museum, I kind of have to say yes.
I thought, well.
So I will say yes. I think it's definitely, I view it as a good space to host these conversations in, but I want to make very clear that the human element is key. So having them actually be present to communicate with, so having the educators there to talk to the people that have the understanding. If we were doing an in-person conference or something like that, that would be a good place for it. And I think that it does hold its space in nothing else to inform them of the way I look at it, like going back to kind of the previous question is it's good for us to share our from I don't know how it is worded in other countries, but where I'm from, it's called traditional ecological knowledge. That's all well and good from my perspective. I fall firmly in the side that Dr. Ihi falls in as far as like providing the information to help move us forward. This is why I love these kind of conversations with so many different cultures, because I find that especially with indigenous cultures, there's so much that's common. There's a lot of similarities. So we definitely look at our ancestors as well to kind of help us guide our way forward. And I think in order to move forward, we do have to kind of open up and provide our ecological knowledge. With that said, I know from our perspective, and I think this is true for museum spaces as well, is to be careful from at least us identifying certain sites, because our history is anytime we would identify whether it's a sacred site or culturally relevant site or a burial site, even archaeological site, you name it, it gets destroyed. It ultimately somebody will come in, and whether it's I can't even pretend to know the reasoning, but a lot of the times it's them just coming and taking stuff. Um, so as long as we protect our sacred sites in that way, I think museums hold a very key position in this conversation. As long as, like I said, as long as we don't lose the very human element of that relationship.
Mhm. Thank you, Rahiem. We have another question that's very popular in the chat, and I'd like to ask both of you this question. And it's from a journalist in Brazil, and she is writing a story for Grist. And since I'm a journalist, I'm just going to take that privilege to ask. She says, I would love to know a bit more about your expectations for COP30, the Conference of the Parties of the UN climate change, as Brazil promised to make this the most indigenous of COPs. And are you aware of COP30 channels for indigenous voices at the event? So.
That's me? Yes.
Yes, please.
Okay. I recently had a question or a inquiry from a couple of colleagues at Google. Am I going to COP? I said, attempted to before, failed spectacularly. Why would I do it again? There were so many channels and barriers to getting access to it that it was insurmountable. I couldn't see how it was even remotely achievable. So maybe it seems to me to be more about who you know and who's going to put you in there, and whether you'll follow some of the political lines that are laid out for how you would discuss information. I don't have those in both forms. I don't have access, and I don't have the institutional obligations. So I'm a bit of a wild card in that I'm going to say what I'm going to say. And it's inspired by environment, not people. And if people don't like it, that's tough. I'm not changing my position on that, because I have obligations to environment first, not people. And so my work is in health population. Health has nothing to do with people. It has to do with the environment that causes it. So environment has to run first in all the initiatives that I'm involved with. If that was consistent with some of the thinking, then I would welcome the opportunity to come and visit, speak, and determine some of the ideas that may help. Unfortunately, though, I think what happens is that because they are so politically driven, we tend to have people that want to be out the front talking about what their agendas are. And simply because they're old, they have brown skin, and sometimes tattoos, people are going to take their opinion as the best process to follow. But that's not necessarily the case. Sometimes we have a separation between those that have applied knowledge and those that have academic knowledge, and some that have unwillingly become a tool on behalf of a colonized mind, and that they can continue to provide the repetition and therefore the bearing of the depth of colonized thinking into their own people without knowing it. And as you know, colonization is complete when the colonizer doesn't need to be there anymore, when we do it to ourselves. And people aren't aware that that's happening sometimes. And when we put people in positions like COP30 to discuss ideas, people take that as the way forward, when it may not be. So we have to be quite careful about who those voices are, and that there's a real variety and not just one source of where that's coming from and the same people delivering it. Likewise, I see sometimes where they'll put up a rangatahi voice or a youth voice. Youth voice needs a lot of support. And sometimes people will take that as a leadership opportunity too, but they don't have the background behind them of applied experience in nature to be able to voice those things. So I love having them there, and I love having some of the really right-wing political ideas from some of our people being put out there, because they provide a point of discussion, and with young fellas as well. But you need the variety, and without it, it's just the repeating of the same thing that happens year after year. So I'm not sure how you get access to these things. I've tried in the past, it crapped itself. So us three should go, and we could, of course, have it.
Thank you. I think you've alluded to how the access issue related to our Indigenous communities, and I think that has always been a serious issue when it comes to the climate COPs. Rahiem, do you have experience with this and your views?
I must be even lower on the totem pole because I have never even heard of it. I don't think I'm at a high enough level. Maybe I do a lot of grassroots kind of work, and maybe one day I'll be invited, but I tend to not go places I'm not invited to. So I don't know if it's cultural or just personal.
Thank you. There's been Pacific Islanders have been instrumental in integrating some of the Indigenous voices into the climate and also United Nations places and frameworks, but it continues to be a challenge. And as Ihi said, that sometimes it's who you know and who you're connected to that gets you there as an Indigenous person. We have 2 minutes to wrap up. I'm just going to hand it back to you for closing remarks. Rahiem, I'll start with you, and then we'll end with Dr. Heke's remarks.
Yes, I just wanted to say Katapatomok, thank you all for this opportunity, and I'll just leave on on one note, and that's I like to think of it as the 4 R's, which is responsibility, relationship, respect, and reciprocity. I believe that all of us, especially, I apologize, all my Indigenous community members, I put a little bit more emphasis on us, onus on us to acknowledge the responsibility we have to Mother Nature and to reestablish or foster that relationship that we have, to get that knowledge back if it has been lost, or to keep that knowledge going, gain some more knowledge the same way our ancestors did, to pass it on to our descendants, to show that respect to Mother Nature that it so rightly deserves, and to then show the reciprocity that it has long since been overdue, that at least from my area, that it's been long overdue that we show it. So thank you again, and I definitely appreciate the opportunity.
Thank you, Rahiem. He.
Kia ora mai koutou, mo te tautoko mana ki tangi tēnei o tātou haere hi koe ki ngā moe o tanga o tai au katoa. Thank you very much, e mara, rangi for leading us down the question lines that you have. You're a gun at this. It's impressive to be in your presence. I appreciate you. Bro, having you present here, like I said, you could have turned off your video and people would have been impressed just with your voice. The content and the ideas that you deliver shows us the importance of applied knowledge, fellas that live on the ground and do the work. Without them, we lose the connection to be able to process what land and water's telling us. So while I end up being down the philosophical end of things, we also need the practitioners to tell us, actually, the stuff you read doesn't work. You got to go out and do the do and burn the things that you need to find out what actually happens from it. So kudos to the way that you lead your life, to my brother. Recently, I was at a conference in San Diego before that fellow with the orange head got in, and I was in a break during the conference and standing outside, and one of the fellows came out and was talking to me. He says, how do you think it's going? I said, yeah, not too bad. He said, where are you from, New Zealand? He says, oh, you have a lot of stories and myths about the environment and climate from there. And I said, whoa, whoa, whoa. They might be myths to you, but that's because you don't understand them. I said, there's a time every year, usually around Christmas, for 1 hour where we'll get swarmed by sandflies. Then from there, some of our young fellas were sent down to the beach to rake the beach, to create more surface area for the sandhoppers to not get access to the eggs that were produced by the taheke fish, which would then produce more of the kahawai, produce more of the snapper, and then produce more of the kingfish that we were after. You can't tell me that myths are produced out of nothing when I can tell you thousands of years of observation were required for us to develop that story. So they may be myths to the people that don't understand them, but to us as Indigenous people, the codex was always important. The way of knowing was always important. We're in a new phase now where the collection of this data is being held back by all these Indigenous nations, but we're offering ourselves up as a way of figuring out how we can provide a safe environment, data sovereignty for this information, then for it to be meted out as we choose. It's in a new era. I look forward to seeing what that's going to do, and I appreciate the opportunity to come and talk to you all today and to continue on the discussion from Te Rangi Hiroa, our first Māori graduate that ended up with a PhD from Yale. Maybe I'll try and get one of those too. O tira, o te kia koutou. Ngā mate maha mai o te ki tērā motu. Moi mai rā ko koutou. Tēnā koutou ki mai tātou. Thank you very much.
Patai ihi, amatanga whila whānua tuilo siufunga ni tau. Thank you so much for sharing your wisdom and strength with us today. It's truly appreciated, and I am always grateful to sharing your knowledge. Rahiem, I'm grateful for your patience. I'm grateful for you also sharing your knowledge and having us be part of it. Eric, thank you for hosting this very important conversation. Indigenous voices continue to be instrumental in ensuring that the climate crisis is addressed from the lenses of those who are on the front lines and who will continue to suffer first and worse. So on behalf of the panelists and myself, thank you so much for having us. And over to you.
Thank you, Dr. Jackson, for moderating the conversation. Dr. Heke, Mr. Eleazer, for your thoughtful insights. We will send everyone a follow-up email after this event with the recording and information on the next event of our fall speaker series, which will be in a week on November 6th, where we hope you'll join us for a panel on how to talk about climate and clean energy now with our director, Dr. Anthony Lazarowitz, and Will Howard from the Potential Energy Coalition. Have a great rest of your week, everyone.